The Two Gray Goatees and a Whistle. Today I'm joined by Andrew Prent, one of my former students. I got to coach him, which was great back when he was in middle school. But get Andrew today. And today we're going to talk about racing. So, Andrew, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me on. I've watched a couple of your guys' episodes with Andrew, and I think the one with Ellie was in it. So I'm happy to get the opportunity to sit here and talk about my story.
Yeah, and I'm glad to have you on here. And, racing is something I want to talk about because, dude, it's a sport, obviously. And there's a lot of strategy to it. And I know sometimes it's a joke. It's like, oh, they just make left turns or whatever it is. But
Yeah,
there's obviously a lot more to it. And there is an athletic entity to the sport as well. And, outside of strategy and everything else that goes with it, the mental game. So we're going to talk about that. So, kind of the first thing I want to talk about is what I have my guests on here is let's talk about how you got what was sports like for you when you were growing up. What were some of the things you did growing up, and then how that lead you into racing, and to basically where you're at now, and the opportunities you've been given. So let's talk about how things got started for you.
yeah. At a young age, I got introduced into football. Uh, Loved football when I was growing up. I really wanted to pursue it when I got older. Just the cars just didn't ever play out, and so I played football when I was younger. Played t-ball. Uh, a lot of times on the weekends, my dad would go to the field and play softball with like the adult softball league. And I'd get to go with him and do that and just doing any kind of activities outside, I guess, right? But as far as when I got into high school, it was kind of like I had a decision, like I could race or I could play high school sports. And so my freshman year, I didn't race at all, and I just focused on sporting activities in high school and whatnot. And then my sophomore year, I took the spring off and didn't play any sports and just started racing. What really got me started into racing was probably going to the shop at a young age with my dad, because he had made a living out of it on the building side rather than racing. And so he would let me come to the shop with him a lot when he was building cars and would try to teach me a little bit here and there how to do it. And that made me really interested in racing itself and wanting to go do it. And so went up to Pocatello when I was, shoot, I think I was 13, and he was asked to help work on two trucks that were running up that speedway up there. And we went up there on a Friday night, or at the track, all day. Well, we were up there all morning, and then worked into the night. We got to the track because we had to go to the shop and set it up and whatnot. So when we got out to the track, we were out there running laps, and it got to the point where the guy was happy with everything, but he was still under daylight out. And so he asked if I had ever been in a race car before, and I had said no. And so he took me over to this fence where he had a bunch of like older cars and stuff, which they call Hornets. They're just like your average front wheel drive car, just an older 1990s model usually. And he's like, "Have you ever drove one of these?" And I was like, "No," because at that point I didn't have my license. So I hadn't really drove anything unless it was just around the house or whatever. And so he's like, "Well, if you can figure out how to start it and drive it over to us, we'll talk about maybe you racing it tomorrow." And so I spent a little while messing with things, and I had a basic understanding of how a car was just from playing like Gran Turismo when I was younger. So I knew you had to push on a clutch and you had to do certain little things here and there. So I ended up getting it started and drove it over to him, and then they taught me what I needed to do. He let me run a couple laps with him in his truck, and then told me to go out there and just run laps. And so I probably ran 150 laps or so that very first night, and then was able to race in the following day. And I actually ended up winning the race, my first ever time out there. And so that pretty much was my start into racing.
Nice. So let's talk about racing at a young age because yeah, I was never really around the race scene very much. We didn't really have any of that opportunity around where I lived. There was some tracks, but they're, you know, Spokane had one, and then you had Boise and or that area over there, but not anything that really was around. And it just was something that wasn't in my home. But, when I got over here and I'm hearing about you and your sister and, you guys are out racing and you guys are in school, like middle school age. And I'm like, what? And so, and I found out about what's going on at Twin Falls at the track there. And then when I went over there a few times and, got to see some of these races and stuff like that, and I'm seeing kids racing the Hornets. Let's talk about how that continued on, the competition and stuff like that. We started getting into these youth circuits and kind of how does that work? what is that involved when you start getting into the circuit like that? When you get into racing, and what are some of the things that are the logistics, I guess, that are part of that?
So they've got quite a few different classes as far as like, affordable and whatnot. So they got like the Hornet cars, which is pretty much just a gut it and go. So I mean, you get a car from a junkyard or whatever, and just strip it down, take all the glass out of it, all the interior and flammable stuff out, and then you put a little semi of like a 4-point cage, what they call it. So just a halo, like sits above the head. Then you got a hoop in the front and a hoop behind you, and then that's considered a 4-point cage because there's 4 points of contact. And then it's super cheap. You're probably about 2,000 into one of those cars in order to get a cage in it and get it going. And then moving past that, they've got other classes. Like they've got a bomber class, which is like a V8 or a V6 version of a Hornet. And so they got those classes, which is also probably $2,000 to get into that. But once you start getting into like the mini stocks and stuff, then you start to vary because you can start doing upgrades to the engine. You can buy aftermarket suspension parts and all sorts of things like that. And so from that point on, it kind of just depends on what you're willing to spend because you've got guys in the Northwest that are spending $20,000 to build a 4-cylinder race car, and they're racing against other guys that have maybe $5,000 into their car in total. And so it's really just a matter of how much you want to spend. I got into the pro truck division, which I'm pretty sure um I'm pretty sure you and Nick came out and watched the race, didn't you?
Yeah, so I've been out there. I've been out there with Nick, and so yeah, I've been out there with Gonzo, and I've been out there with a couple other people, and then I went out last year. We went out last year when your dad got a. We'll talk about that maybe a little bit later here, but we'll talk about how your dad got nominated or got elected into the Hall of Fame there on the track. But that was the last time I was there, but I don't think you raced that day. But yeah, I got to see you a couple times, and I actually was there when you won. I think it was you raced the car and the truck that night, and I think you won the truck. I can't remember if it was the car or truck
I think it
one
was
that you
the
won that
car.
day, that night. Yeah, but the first one, then when you won, I remember me and Nick came down on the track. Your dad got us to come down on the track and stuff and be in the picture and stuff, which I thought that was super cool. That was like a really cool experience getting to see that. So so yeah, so it's cool. It's and racing and it's fun. It's fun going to the track, and if you're looking for something, it doesn't cost a lot. People in the area, I can at least speak for Magic Valley area that you go to the track. It doesn't cost a lot to go,
No,
and
not
it's
really.
it's fun. It's a good family entertainment. Um, there's like usually what 8 or 9 races sometimes, or different classes too. It's like sometimes like 4 or 5 different classes of races. They got races where you have cars stacked on top of each other and crazy stuff. And then
Double
you got
deckers.
these junkers that yeah, you got these junkers that go out there on the racetrack, and they're leaking oil around the track, and
Yeah.
they might, and it's fun, and they have all these different competitions and stuff like that. And so so going back to the Hornets and stuff, how fast are usually what's it governed at? I mean, how fast do you go around tracks when you're starting out? Let's say you're a 13-year-old, 14-year-old. I'm assuming there's some safety as far as speed. How does that work on speed and what you're allowed and not allowed to do?
As far as speed goes, I mean, there's no limit. Like, there's not a speed limit you're not allowed to pass. It's just you're kind of just restricted to what the car has for suspension, for tires, for a motor, and then how much momentum you can keep up in the corners. And so track size is another factor in how fast you go. So there's not really a speed limit. You want to go as fast as you possibly can, but like in a Hornet car, I would say when I was 13 racing Pocatello, I would find it hard to say that I was going faster than maybe 70 miles an hour down the straightaways. But that's just because I had a 1990s or a 19, I think 87, like Pontiac Le Mans. It was just a really old car. Didn't have much. It had like 50 horsepower. I mean, it wasn't nothing crazy. And so, I mean, you didn't really get up in those high speeds. But then fast forward to like 2020 when I was racing, when I was, 18, I raced in the class where you could do whatever you wanted to your car it just had to be a four-cylinder motor. You couldn't have a turbo or anything like that, and just it just had to be a four-cylinder motor. So you could build whatever you want. So you had like front-wheel drive cars out there, little Honda Civics and whatnot, and then you had your old Fox body Mustangs. They had a mini modified, which was a truck courier chassis that was cut up and made to look like a modified, just really small. And then I had my car out there, which was a fully built tube chassis. It was built ground up to be a race car. It wasn't a factory car off the street that had a, $1,000 motor in it, an extremely expensive rear end, stuff like that. And all those cars got to race against each other, but you couldn't beat a certain lap time. And so that was the only other rules, four-cylinder motor, you can't go faster than this. And if you did, you broke out and went a lap down and pretty much weren't able to win the race. So there really isn't no speed limit in regards to how fast you're able to go.
Okay, that's good to know because I'm watching this and Twin Falls tracks, obviously is a smaller track, so there's only so fast obviously you can go around it and stuff like that. So I was always kind of curious about if there was some kind of restriction they had on how fast you can go or anything like that. But when you're younger, at least obviously when you're an adult, go at it, however fast you can get. So
Yeah.
let's let's kind of talk about the learning curve and stuff like that. So obviously your dad was involved in racing it, he understood it. I'm assuming he was with you, on the building aspect and stuff like that. As far as the driving aspect and, learning strategies and, how to drive, where did that come from? And was there multiple people involved in that, or was there one individual that might have helped you kind of fine tune maybe, how you raced, or obviously you learn as you go situations. So how'd that
Yeah.
all come
At,
into play?
at a young age, when I first started, that class allowed us to have spotters. And so basically, you just have communication in the car. So you're not having to just focus on using your mirrors. My dad was my spotter. So he was able to watch from outside the track and say, hey, they're inside, outside, just like, hey, work on this. So in the early parts of my racing, like my dad just telling me, what stuff I could do better. Cause I mean, at that point, I was young enough to where I didn't really have any experience. I didn't have anything to go off of. I was just kind of going by instinct. And that's pretty much all you really need is instinct to drive a race car. And just, you got to understand, tire wear and all that stuff. But when it came down at that point, it was just a matter of my dad saying, hey, open up your entry. You're pinching it, it's slowing you down, right? And so that helped me. But once I started moving up through the divisions and I got into the Pro 4 class, there was a bunch of veteran drivers that were in that division who had been racing these cars since the early 2000s. So pretty much my whole life, these guys had spent dedicating their lives to working on these kind of cars and driving them. And so I was able to, get GoPro footage and sit down with those guys and look at them and discuss, where you could be better, where you're messing up, how to, smoothen your line, crispen your line, anything of that nature. And so, uh,
Okay. Obviously, you played football and stuff like that, and you had other sports coming through up. Did any of those sports kind of transfer over, or any skills, or how you approach racing the same way you approach, like if you play football? Did any of that transfer over, or is it just kind of its own thing when it comes to racing?
it's hard to say. I mean, as far as from a physical aspect, I don't really think much translated over just because the physical demand of racing compared to football or basketball is just much different. You're not using your legs much in a race car other than to push the gas and brake. And there's not a lot of motion that you can do in football or whatever to help with like turning a steering wheel while experiencing G forces, which is a pretty big thing in regards to racing that isn't really taken into account when people are talking about it. But from a mental aspect, I think there's a lot to take from sports and stuff, and the mentality you have when you're in a race car. I know at a younger age, you and Gonzo would teach us about our mentality and having a no quit attitude or just like focusing on what you're doing, right? And so if you look at it from that way, when you get into a wreck, there's ways you can go about it. You can get scared, not want to do it again. You could get angry and quit, or you could think about it and be like, hey, how do I not do that moving forward? And that's just kind of the same like if you are running a route as a receiver as a young player, and you run the wrong route and the quarterback throws an interception. Well, you can get mad and quit and throw your helmet down because the coach said that you ran the wrong route, or you can go back and study and try to see what you did wrong and how you can not make that mistake moving forward, right?
Right. No, and that's great. So yeah, I think, I think maybe the mental aspect probably more than anything, probably I can see that helping. What are some other things? So let's talk about teamwork because I think that plays a part because it's not just a driver. I mean, you got to be able to communicate. In the smaller circuits like that, how many other people are involved in this race just other than the driver? When you talked about having a spotter, I'm assuming somebody's, a mechanic on the crew or something like that. How many other people are usually involved? And this is just at a small circuit. And, when you watch, at NASCAR level, stuff like that, there's like 10 or 12 guys or whatever that are on the
Yeah.
pit crew and they're out there all have different jobs, changing tires or adjusting stuff or fuel tanks or whatever. But when you're at a smaller level, smaller circuits, how is, teamwork still has to be there. So what are some other people that are involved in this that aren't seen, I guess, behind the scene people that help you get through this or race?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it starts at the shop. So a lot of stuff when it comes to racing is like what you do behind the doors, behind closed doors. Races aren't necessarily just one on the track. You gotta put in the work behind the scenes. You gotta put in the work in the shop and check your car, make sure things are straight, make sure things are tight, because there's a lot of vibration that goes through a race car during a race, and so things come loose. Even if you think, man, I put as much strength as I could into that, it's still going to come loose. It's just a part of it. And so for example, like when I was younger, it was just me and my dad that would go work on cars. And then when we go to the racetrack, I might have one or two other people that would come in case I need to change a tire because you need someone to jack the car and then somebody, to pull a tire off, put a tire back on. But I've been fortunate enough that I'm starting to make a living racing now, not from a driver's seat, but from like, an engineer or a fabricating standpoint. I work for a super late model team that tours the country, and we went to the Snowball Derby this last year, or this year actually. Sorry, the end of November, and then the first week of December. We took, there was probably 10 to 12 of us as well, and it was just for a late model, and it wasn't even a NASCAR. But you got to have people for pit stops, and at the local level or the weekly division, like with me, um, the races aren't big enough that you got to make pit stops, so you don't need as many guys. So when I go to the track, I'll have me, my dad, so my I'll be the driver, my dad will be spotting, and then I take two or three other people. Usually, I got a real good friend of mine who races as well. His name is Jordan Carpenter. He comes and he's typically the one that helps make us changes, or if the car suffers damage in the heat race or whatever, he'll help me fix it. Or if I have a mechanical issue and we got to replace the part, he'll be there to fix it. And then I try to have at least one other person. So we got one person to jack, one person to change a tire.
Okay.
But as far as the teamwork aspect of it, like it's critical, and that was evident for us at that big race at the Snowball Derby a couple or this last month. We had a bad pit stop and we didn't have the right tire pressures in the car, and it was the difference in finishing first or second in that race and finishing 10th because the air pressures weren't set right, and we drove off into the corner and bottomed the car out and almost wrecked. So I think the teamwork side of racing is critical, especially even in the lower levels, because if you get a flat tire, a lot of tracks give you a time to fix it. Now they'll give you, okay, hey, we'll give you 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes to change the tire and get back out. You don't lose a lap. And some of these tracks or these races, guys are fast enough they can just drive back through the field even if they were the fastest car. And so it's critical to have a good teamwork, and everyone know what they're doing.
All right, let's talk about memories and accomplishments that you've had. And I've been fortunate. I've actually been at two of your races where you won, and they're in Twin Fall or the Twin Falls area at the track there at Magic Valley Track. So, um, what are some moments that have stand out for you? What are some of your favorite memories that you've had, and why were those? Why did those stick out more than others? What are some of the memories that you've had in racing?
Hmm. I'd like to start with, so I think my first real big memory in racing is getting to share the track with a good friend of mine, Drew Reitzma. At a young age, when I first got into racing, my dad was building his race trucks, and that's when I got to come to the shop and get a look at what it's like behind the scenes. And so I always got to go to the track with him and watch him race when I was, 10, 11 years old, a pretty young kid. And I always, wanted to have the opportunity to get to race with him just because it would be cool. I guess you say I idolized him, right? So in 2021, we got a race truck. I bought one with the help of Eric John, who was my boss at the time, but he owns a power sports shop here in Gooding. He helped us get a truck, and I got to share the track and race against him. And eventually, I ended up, beating him a couple of times that year, though he probably beat me more than I beat him. Another big moment, or favorite moment that stands out to me in racing in my past is the very first race I took my daughter to. Was May 4th of last year, and I think that was probably the race you were at where I won in the truck. I took the Pro 4 out and we done it, and then I had raced the truck, and I think at that race I had raced several laps, side by side, battling for the lead with another competitor,
Yeah, it was a tight
Jack
race.
Wally. And that was an extremely fun race because it was the first time that I got to have a true hard battle with somebody, and to run multiple laps like that at this level without making contact with each other and wrecking each other is it's kind of hard to do because these guys aren't like it's not their lives. They're just out there to have fun on the weekends, and so it's not as serious to them. And so to be able to go out there and battle 35 laps side by side with somebody and it be competitive and like nail biting, you're not gonna know who's gonna win. Like it was cool. It was an awesome memory to think about when I look back on my journey. And then I would have to say probably my first win at Meridian because I experienced a lot of trial and error at that track. I wrecked a lot of cars there, had a lot of mechanical failures. I've led every lap of a race and come in to take the white flag. A caution came out, and on a restart, I got wrecked and lost the race. I've had mechanical failures cause me to lose a race or whatever. And so when I finally got over the hump and was able to win in Meridian the first time in 2022, or no, 2023 at the Pink Lady Classic, full of a packed house in Meridian, that was a really cool moment for me as well.
Nice. So let's see here. You answered those questions pretty well. So I mean, going on there, toughest setbacks maybe you've had that you faced in racing, because you know there's always struggles, and like you said, trying to go over that hump in Meridian. What are some other things that that are challenging in this life of racing? Because I mean, obviously you're there because you love it. I'm assuming because
Yeah.
you know everything else. It's not like you're rolling in huge money right now. Which I mean, there's potential of that, but I'm sure you're there for the love, and that's how you should be there, or why you should be
Yeah.
there. So what are some setbacks, or some of the toughest setbacks you've faced, and what did you learn from them to help you advance, I guess, or grow from those mistakes?
I mean, once I graduated high school, it kind of became my responsibility to pay for things rather than, if I got into an accident or bent something, my parents would buy it for me. And so, the first time I got into a pretty good wreck in the Pro 4 and it hurt the motor, I mean, that was a pretty big kind of like setback, like, holy cow. And then you start to understand the cost of things. And so when that had happened, it forced me to start thinking about what I'm doing, as far as my maintenance goes. Like, you can't just leave your race car outside all night. And so you gotta, put it underneath the car cover, get it tied down so the weather stays away from things. So you don't break a timing belt because it sat out in the weather too long, right? And so it taught me at a young age just to take care of my stuff, my equipment. And as you start having issues on the racetrack, like in 2023, I had a fuel line rot out, and it took four. We had four races that weekend, and I didn't get to race in any of them because we couldn't find the issue, and it was a simple maintenance thing. And if we would have checked on that and worked at it, we would have caught that it was coming apart before it ever happened, and I wouldn't have wasted a whole weekend and spent a bunch of money buying electrical parts if I had known it was a fueling issue, right? And so those kind of things have helped me, and just in like my everyday life, I was like being a parent. I mean, I can't undermine certain things, or I'm not going to be properly taking care of my daughter. If I leave something out on the table and I'm not taking care of it, she could get into it, right, and hurt herself. If it's something sharp or whatever, you never know. But I will say in my time racing, like I've been really fortunate that I haven't really had too many like big setbacks. A lot of the damage and the things that I've done in a race car have been very, very minor. And so I don't have like a real big thing that I could say was a setback for me, really.
Okay. And that's good. I mean, hopefully keep up that good luck there. So walk us through a typical race day. So from the time you arrive at the track to get ready to have that final race that night, what's in the life of Andrew, what's it like? What goes on during that day? Because sounds like it's a long day. I mean, you get there, I'm sure, or pretty fairly early, I guess, because I'm sure there's plenty of things you got to do. So, what's the typical day like? What time are you showing up? Versus when you get done.
Oh, if we're just running like here in Twin, typically, I'll leave the house about 8 in the morning and head to the shop and get the car loaded up and stuff. So I usually am on the road by about 10 in the morning. But a lot of tracks like Twin Meridian, you're not allowed to enter until noon because they just have the gates locked and the pit stuff. So that regulates people so they're not showing up at 7 in the morning to go steal a parking spot. So a lot of tracks kind of regulate you to be in there at noon or at 10 o'clock in the morning. It kind of depends on the weekend. If it's a really big or a really big showing going on, like with the sprint cars are there, they'll let a lot of those guys in, early in the morning to work on their stuff. But usually I'm at the racetrack about noon, and you got to get the car unloaded. You got to get it. I get my car up in there off on jack stands so that I can fine tune things, torque tires, nut and bolt, just whatever needs to get done if needed. After that, I think the first thing that we do probably first practice. Usually you'll have two practice sessions in the day, and they're usually about 10 to 20 minutes long, depending on how big your class is. And you get to run some laps, come in the pits, make some changes. If there's enough time, you can get back out there and run some more. And then you kind of sit around for a little bit. At that point, you start cooling the car down. So when I was in the truck division, it really packed heat under the motors. So when I get in the pits, I get it up on stands so that there's space so the air could run out the bottom. Open the hood up and get fans blowing in on the motor to get it cooled down. And after that, you'd run second practice. Usually it's about an hour apart. And then normally, after second practice, it's a quick turnaround into qualifying. And a lot of divisions, it depends. But what I've done has been single car qualifying. So, you'll get a lineup based off of your practice position. So if I practiced and I was first overall in second practice, then I would qualify last. And if I was last in practice, I would qualify first. So it's just kind of basically an invert. And so, go out there and you run your qualifying laps, and then, they'll have all their, anthem, the national anthem, they'll have the Pledge of Allegiance go on or whatever. They'll do some intermediate activities with, kids' bike races and stuff. And so in that time, you can grab a bite to eat, recover, use the bathroom, or make any, final adjustments to your car before a heat race. Or in my case, we would have two main events, and so we'd run our first main event, 35, 40 laps, however long it was. And then, you come back into the pits, you'd have time, you'd have to go to tech, and tech, they'll inspect your car, make sure it's legal, make sure you pass inspection. And so sometimes that's checking the carburetors, sometimes that's checking your track width, which is like the outside of your tires. And then in other certain cases, they'll just make sure you got the right torque converter on the car, or that you have a sealed 602 engine or whatever it might be. And then, you get to go on the track and race. And then afterwards, when the races are all over and said and done, they open the gates up and let the fans come through. And so you get to stand behind your car and, do a bunch of autographs, let the kids sit in the race car or whatever. Sometimes if you're feeling nice enough, you can start it for them or whatever, because kids always love to hear the cars when they run and stuff. And so that's basically just what a typical day looks like at a racetrack for me. I don't typically head home till usually after midnight if I'm racing, just because I like to enjoy and hang out and relax a little bit before loading the pit up and loading the truck back up in the car and all that.
Nice. Let's talk about real quick. You know, uh, what separates a good driver from a great driver, in your opinion? If you've been around races a long time, you've been You've seen a lot of quality racers. You've seen some really good racers out there, I'm sure. What separates the good ones from the great ones?
I think a lot of it is just like the ability to adapt. I know in these smaller ranks and the stuff around here, like the Hornet level, I mean, really, it I wouldn't say it really takes a whole lot of skill. You just got to have the want to do it and the drive to do it and want to be better. But when you start getting up into the higher ranks, like in the super late model division, you've got to be able to adapt. You've got to be able to know like what your car is doing through feel, and that's a big thing with racers is being able to feel the car. So like for me, a lot of times once I really got the hang of my Pro 4, I was able to pull onto the track and, scrub the tires back and forth a little bit and be like, "Hey, I think, we're a little light on bar. We need to come back in and make a bar adjustment because I don't think it's right." And if the car's laying over, it's tight, it's pushing, you're not very fast. You're not smooth through the corner. So I think one of the biggest things is just that aspect of it, being able to feel what the car's doing and know, okay, it's tight in this entry, but it feels good off. You know, let me widen my entry up a little bit so I have a straighter shot into the center of the corner and the car is rotating fine off. Maybe that'll help me so I'm fine, right? But a lot of people don't understand that. They think that the car just is what it is. They don't have the ability to know that they could change their line to make the car feel better, run faster, and to be more competitive. I think another thing that separates a good driver from a bad driver is knowing the car. I know a lot of the people who are faster, they're the ones that do their own work on their cars. That's not just mom and dad do it for them or they take it to a guy's shop to get worked on. They're out there, understanding the basics of the car so that they understand what's happening when they're out there, right? And then really, I mean, just seat time. Seat time is probably the biggest thing. I found that out the hard way this last year. I mean, I didn't race at all in 2024 or in 2025, excuse me. And I decided to hop in a modified, which is it's a really physically demanding car to drive just because it's a really big motor, lots of horsepower, and you got a really tiny tire that you got to try to get traction to. And so I hadn't raced for a year, and decided to hop into that thing and try to go race against guys that have been running 10 races that year, and I was out of my ballpark. I wasn't prepared. My senses weren't up. My just the natural instinct that you build throughout the season, it just wasn't there. And so I was, kind of second guessing things. Kind of I didn't really have trust in the car yet, and so it was a really big setback for me. Is just trying to just jump in without having a bunch of seat time and having practice laps. So I think those are kind of some of the big things that separate a good from a bad driver.
Okay, good. A lot of good information here. I'm enjoying it. Let's talk about goals in your future, what you got going on here. You talked about right now, you said you're getting into fabrication. Is that a portion
Yeah.
of racing? What are some
Yeah, I've
things you're
been I've
doing
been
right
building
now?
cars.
You're building cars. What's some of your short term goals, maybe your long term goals, where you want to go from here? Racing career rise. What part do you see yourself going into? Are you looking more of the engineering now, that part, or do you still want to get behind the wheel eventually, or kind of where are you at with this?
I mean, I always want to be a driver. I mean, that's all the fun in it. But right now, and it's just this the economy. It's just hard to own a race car and to fund it and to drive it and stuff because it's super expensive. It's $1,200 for a set of tires, and that set of tires is going to last you two races, and then you're going to have to buy new ones. And the cost of race fuel. A lot of these cars you have to run a 110, Sunoco race fuel or VP race fuel, and that's $14 a gallon right now, and so it's just extremely expensive and just hard to do. And you're gonna use probably 15, 20 gallons in a weekend depending on how many laps or how many races you run that weekend, right? So right now my goal is kind of just to keep at the fabricating side, learning how to build race cars, how to maintain them, how to set them up, and how to do basic repairs, right? And once I, learn that trade, my hope is to be able to, open up my own race shop eventually and work on customers' cars and stuff, and hope that I make enough money that I can fund myself to keep driving. But I think my end goal is to be able to maybe, driving isn't always going to be in my future, and so if I have to take a step back so that I can, put my daughter in a race car, I think, that's probably the the thing that I'm looking forward to is to learning these things so that when Haley gets to the age where she can race, I can start her at a young age because a lot of kids nowadays start racing, at 5 years old. They've got a bandolero class where you got 5 year olds racing and they're out there on the big track, learning all that stuff at a young age versus where I was 13 years old when I started. And so I didn't, get a lot of seat time before I jumped in. I didn't have, the background of racing go-karts or bandoleros or, dirt carts, whatever it might be. So I want to get to the point where I understand this enough that I can build and get Haley into a race car and, just get her racing career started.
Nice. Okay, there is another part of this I do want to discuss. Uh, in a broader race world, and you have a connection to this. And I know might be a little touchy, but let's talk about Greg Biffle for a minute. Are you okay with that? Yeah. So anybody in even the casual fan of NASCAR, they know who Greg Biffle was. Me personally, growing up in the Northwest, there was two drivers in the Northwest because that's Northwest in NASCAR is not really known. But the two drivers were Greg Biffle and Casey Kane. Greg was from Vancouver, Washington. Casey came from Enumclaw. And so those were the two drivers I kind of followed because I'm like, they're from the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
That's from our area. That's who I always kind of rooted for. So what was your connection to the Biffle family and the race team? What is your experience with them? And, unfortunately passed away here not too long ago, but what's your connection to Greg Biffle and that family?
Yeah, so with the job that I have now, working for Preston Peltier, we had partnered with Sigma Performance Services, which is out of Vegas, out of Las Vegas, Nevada, and they also have a location in like Statesville, North Carolina, like Mooresville, and like the heart of racing, because racing is pretty small out here on the West Coast. And so when we partnered with SPS, the owner asked my boss if he wanted to take over the not to take over, but to like help take care of the Tri Cities race they had over in over by trying to think what that is in Washington. Um,
Tri-Cities,
it's,
Washington. Yeah,
yeah,
that's Richland, Kennewick. Yeah, that's
yeah,
not too
right
far where I
there.
grew up here. Yep.
Yeah, so they had an ARC Menard series race, which was like the first step in NASCAR. They call it the West Series or the ARC Menards, whichever you want to go by. And they had hired Greg Biffle to run the car, and he had run it the year prior. And so the owner of SPS asked us if we wanted to go out to help crew on the car and get to hang out with him and whatnot. And so we the car got brought to our shop in Kimberly. We kind of went over a little bit, loaded the trailer, and we took it to Washington. And I got to spend the weekend working on the car and crewing for Greg Biffle while he raced it. And so I got to meet Greg. I got to meet his wife Christina, and I got to meet their little boy and just hang out with him for a little while. And then we ran that race. I think we finished second. It was pretty cool. He was very kind and open to us. Talking to us and making us realize, that just because that they ran NASCAR doesn't make them, not human. They're just a normal person too, just like us. They've got a higher stature. They got a bigger following, I guess you could say. And so a couple months later, the owner of SBS called us again and said that Greg wanted to run another ARCA race on the West Coast, but at Portland International Raceway. And so me and my other coworker got to drive out to Washington and um, and get to work with Greg Biffle again. This is a picture from that race. I don't know how to flip the camera on this thing, so yeah,
No, that's
that's
fine.
Greg Biffle there,
No,
and I got
that's
to stand
good.
right by him. And so we
All
got to
right.
go out there for a second time and get to work with Greg again. And by that point, we had already, developed a relationship with him after getting to meet with him and work with him for a weekend. And so when that thing was all said and done, he took us out to dinner at a nice restaurant there in Portland and just talked about life with us, just explained his backstory and where he grew up and what like racing was like for him. And he talked to us a lot about I know there was those floodings going on during that hurricane in that area. and he talked about, taking his helicopter out there and rescuing people with Cletus. And so it was just really cool to get to meet him and get to, get a little deep dive into like his life and his upbringing and coming from the West Coast and making it out in the East racing and being in NASCAR. So that's how I kind of got connected to the Biffles. And, unfortunately, they passed away not too long ago. And so that was that was an interesting deal because I didn't know him my whole life, obviously, but I did get to meet him and make build a friendship with him essentially, and get to hang out with him and his family, and so it was a tough day learning about that for sure for everybody in the shop, especially the ones involved.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That was, it was obviously anybody who passes away like that, I mean, anybody,
Yeah,
it sucks, but, you know, I mean, obviously when you're well known like that, it gets noticed, I guess,
yeah,
and so,
for sure.
yeah, that's that, but still, what an experience to be able to be with somebody who's basically at the pinnacle of what everybody in racing would like to do, and where they would eventually like to be. So being able to spend those moments, I'm sure were very valuable. And I mean, that's amazing to be able to get experience like that.
It was it was awesome getting to, be on the radio and getting to listen because a lot of racing is giving feedback. So as a driver talking to your spotter or your crew chief or your car chief, you gotta give feedback like, "Hey, it's loose or it's tight or it's doing this in this corner," or you just gotta give feedback, and so I only knew, like, what I knew. So when I got to sit on the radio while Biffle was racing, it was awesome to get to listen to him, just how in depth and how focused he was on what the car was doing at every single point and every single lap. He was able to remember, 10 laps ago, in this turn, the car did this, and this is what I did to fix it. And over the course of the run, I felt like it started to help make the car better. And so just getting to listen to him and talk about it and how he approaches the situation and what the car's doing is just awesome. And it helped me and taught me a lot as a just in general as a driver of, when I'm in a car next, what I need to be focusing on and what things I can do differently to help the car out if it's not, handling perfectly that race.
Nice. All right. So we're going to do something called little quick hits. I'm going to ask you 3 questions and try to be quick with it if you can. I mean, you can go on about it if you need to, kind of give me more of a why, but we'll try to get that going here. Dude. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 3 questions and kind of, it's called quick hits. So you can be as fast or slow as you want. I'm not going to care. But your first question, you ready? Ready for these three? All right, man. Here we go. Favorite track you've raced on and why?
I would say probably the Mission Valley Super Oval and Polson, Montana, way up there. It's my favorite racetrack just because it's not a perfect circle. It's like kind of like a triangle. It's got a really sweeping wide 1 and 2, and then it kind of carries into a dog leg off into the backstretch into 3 and 4. And so there's technically more than turns on that track, but it was just a super unique track, a super unique place. It was the first time I'd ever traveled outside Idaho to race, and I did extremely well. I was third fastest in qualifying. I got second in the first race and then won the second race. So that would probably be my most favorite track.
Okay. Hardest track you've ever competed on?
Probably Meridian, Meridian Speedway in Meridian, Idaho. It's a really small quarter-mile track. It's really tight. The walls come up really fast. It's got a really old surface, so it's slippery. There's not a lot of grip. You're sliding around when the tires get hot. And just my I guess not lack of success, but like my just the amount of misfortune that I had there, it definitely made it the hardest track for me to learn initially and try to figure out how to accomplish and conquer.
Okay. All right. And then the last question, one word that describes racing to you.
I would say, man, that's a good question. Probably, that's a tough question. Describe racing in one word.
It can be 2 words if you want, or three. Yeah. Or what's best describes racing to you, I guess. And you can not be one word, it can be whatever. If you had to describe racing to you, what would it be?
Um, just if I had to describe racing, probably just sheer competitiveness. Just the smell of race fuel. the smell of burning rubber, the smell of hot engines. I mean, that all of that just kind of goes into describing racing. It's competitive. You know, there's a lot of high tension moments. You can get physically angry. You can be really happy. It's extremely exciting from a fan's perspective. I guess if I were to describe racing with one word, I just have to say exciting.
Nice. Hey, that works. Exciting. That works. All right, man. We got one more segment. I do it every week. It's called the Unusual Mascot of the Week. So for our journey, we're going to go to Kansas, and we're going to go to Buckland High School, and tiny town or a tiny school. Their enrollment 9 through 12 is about 68 students, so pretty tiny. This school logo is a pair of playing cards, a red diamond ace and a red heart ace. If you didn't know, the mascot of the week is the Red Aces, the Red Aces of Buckland High School in Kansas. A little bit is finding the origin. Not much I could find out why they chose this, but basically, as long as I've the stuff that I could find on them was they adopted the Red Aces as a playing card theme, so it was pretty unique. And so their mascot are basically a diamond and a heart of aces playing cards. So that's their mascot. Notable accomplishments. It looks like in 21-22 boys basketball finished fourth in state with a 20-7 record. It was apparently their best season in school history. Volleyball, it looked like they did pretty well in 2023. Local economy, small town ag area, retail trade, educational services, healthcare. Cost of living is pretty low. I mean, obviously not a very big town, and agriculture cost of living is probably not very much. Median home value is 86,000, so it's pretty cheap. Housing summary: rents around $715. Population is 627 people in the area. So that is our mascot of the week, the Red Aces.
Red Aces
from Buckland. Yep, Red Aces. Yep. So I want to thank Andrew for joining me.
Nice.
I appreciate you coming on today. We'll see you soon out there racing. I want to thank all the listeners out there, all the people who take the time to listen, especially the international ones, Finland, people from Lithuania, Singapore, Australia. I appreciate you guys all listening. That's it, everybody. Take care of yourself. Good night.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. And